Hello, I'm Arthur Beam, and this is the story of the Sabbath. This is my wife Teresa, and it has been some time since we got to be here. Between the virus, taking all kinds of liberalities with everybody. I was sick. My wife was sick. It didn't take me down too far, but it just took forever. You just are exhausted.
Yeah. I had a hard time, but the good thing, even just besides the fact we had just an awful winter with the Ukraine invasion, the Russians invading Ukraine, and COVID and everything that's happened, we had a brand new baby born, so that was really good news. And we hope that you're doing well too. And leave us a comment if you're not, and we'll pray for you.
That's right. So, what this one is going to be about is Constantine. Very interesting, very exciting part of history, and an exciting part of the church, really.
Yeah,
So
and it has a big influence on Seventh-day Adventists when it comes to the story of the Sabbath. So, yeah.
It has a big influence on a lot of people. So anyway, you won't want to miss this. Seventh-day Adventists are one of a handful of Protestant denominations that believe Christians should rest on the seventh day like ancient Israel and the Jews do today. They base this belief on the Ten Commandments. In addition, they believe the seventh-day Sabbath is the only day God set aside as a special day of worship. They believe that honoring any other day is disobedience to God's command. If Adventists are correct, then why do Christians attend worship services on Sunday? Adventists teach that in AD 321, the Roman Emperor Constantine issued an edict declaring Sunday as the day of Christian worship, and that the Catholic Church caved to the emperor's edict by shifting the sacred day from the seventh to the first day of the week. But did the Catholic Church really change the Sabbath day to Sunday? Is there really more to the story? We begin a new series that will be exploring the answers to those questions. We will start at the beginning, from Genesis to Mount Sinai, to the life of Christ, to the Reformation, through the 17th century Sabbath wars, all the way to the end of the world. We will be telling the epic tale of this holy day. This is the story of the Sabbath. Growing up, I was just kind of scared of Constantine. Who is this mean guy that killed?
Well, first of all, who was he? When he was around?
Well, I didn't know. As a kid, I was like, I don't know who he is, but he sure is. He's terrifying. He must be this ruthless warrior, kind of like Diocletian or any of those horrible guys.
Nero, Caligula. Well, but the time frame that we're talking about is because we've been going chronologically, and so we started at Genesis, and we went through to when Christ died, and then we've been talking for all you people that are interested in the story of the Sabbath for the early church, the first 100 years. We've done that. Now we're up to Constantine, which is in the 4th century, which is the 300s. So it's been about 300 years since Christ died.
Right.
So that's where we are now.
Right, and so Constantine, he was in the latter 200s when he was born, and then went on into the
Right.
early 300s. So
Right.
that's kind of the era you would want to look at
Right.
if you're looking at it on a timeline.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that's where he's from. So, as I was doing research on this, I was very enlightened. I really loved looking into Constantine's
Mm-hmm.
life. Because you look at him, one thing that a lot of the historians say was he wasn't sold on all the pagan gods and all of that. That wasn't, he did it because that's what he was taught and that's what his family did, and but he wasn't sold on it himself. He just did it kind of like it was a job. It's just a job. He's a soldier, and he's just very good at his job. He always does what he's supposed to do, and so he's brought up in rank, throughout his life, to the point of where he is over one of the vast armies. Is the emperor, and Diocletian's having trouble because he can't quite hold on to things war-wise. Skirmishes here, skirmishes there. He can't quite get a hold of things, so he chooses two really good warriors, generals, that he turns into governors. One is Constantine and one is Maxentius. And so they're over two separate areas of the whole kingdom that Diocletian's over. And they're kind of like there's absolute rulers except only to Diocletian. So Diocletian says something, they have to do it. But outside of that, they're in charge. There had been persecutions of Christians. But up until this time, Diocletian ended up being one of the worst. I've heard, if not the worst. His goal was he wanted people to be respectful to the pagan gods. And that's where we get, you can't pinch the incense, or,
that was one of the forms of idolatry back then. Is that they didn't like sacrifice animals, but they would pinch incense, to the god and to his genius,
vowing loyalty to that god, and that's really all you had to do, and you were okay. Well, that's where all the problems started, because these Christians started not to do that. And at first there weren't laws about this, but Diocletian did not like the fact that there were bishops, there were priests, and there were kind of the evangelical type, evangelistic type, that would say, hey, you guys shouldn't be praying to those demon gods that you do. Well, that ticked Diocletian off. And so it just got, he started going after those particular people that were mouthing off and in his opinion, mouthing off and saying bad things against their gods, who they thought did something for them.
Yeah.
Well, so starts the persecution of the Christians. Well, during this time, after a while, the Diocletian died. And that particular hierarchy of Diocletian kind of fell apart. So who do you have left? You've got Maxentius and you've got Constantine. Who's going to rule the show? Well, there starts to be contention, and worse come to worse, battle come to battle. Here comes Maxentius to take over Rome. And it comes to a particular bridge called the Milvian Bridge. Well, one army's on one side, the other army's on the other side, and it's the night before the big battle, because they're going to cross there. He's already warned Constantine, I'm coming at you. And from what historians say, Maxentius had a a bigger, stronger army. But Constantine was no slouch. He was an incredibly good general. So they're camped on both sides of the river. Constantine looks up, and in the sky there is a sign that it was XP, or what they call Chi Rho. And it was powerful. Back then, they looked at signs and portents and all that very, very seriously.
And the soldiers saw it too. I mean, this was big.
Tens of thousands of soldiers saw this and they're like, what in the world is this? So he goes to bed and he has a dream. God comes to him and he says, I gave you that sign, this XP, you were to put this as your standard. You know, the poles with the flags, the standard, be it on your standards as you go into battle as the sign of your victory, and where it comes from, that it comes from me. So
by this sign conquer, right?
Mm-hmm, it's called by this sign conquer.
And that's the Latin version.
Mm-hmm, right, right. And so he has all his soldiers put it on their shields, the XP, on their standards. I mean, he has it put everywhere. And of course, we're making this battle very short. There's some great books just on the battle itself that I suggest you look at. They're great.
But that was a Christian symbol for Christ at that time.
XP, that's right.
So.
That's right. And of course, Constantine, as we all know, won. Yeah. And he took control of the whole entire region now that had been run by Maxentius, by Constantine, and by Diocletian. Together, he's in charge of the whole thing now.
Yeah.
Emperor Constantine's areas of rulership was vast, from England down through Greece to the Holy Land to parts of northern Africa, encircling the Mediterranean and back up through southern Europe to France.
So we want to go ahead, instead of this being just one long story of Constantine, we want to get to the things that have to do with the Sabbath. But a lot of people get the Edict of Milan, it can confused with the Edict of Toleration. And so we're going to put those texts so you can see.
And they're two separate. They're not, in other words, they're not different names for the same thing. They're two separate things.
Right, right. And so we're going to juxtapose them on the screen. So, as you can see, the Edict of Toleration had nothing to do with forcing people to have a day of worship. As a matter of fact, it was more a day everybody had off. It was like a national holiday. Christians at this time worshipped every single day. So this would have had to say, if it was an anti-Christian or a pro-Christian law, it would have addressed that, but it didn't.
Right.
So at that time, it was not confirming an exclusive day of worship for Christians. Okay, now this is where it's going to get a little complicated, because a lot of Protestants are going to misunderstand this, or some people that say, okay, well, if it's a day where we're supposed to rest and go to church, if it's going to be confused as a day of worship, but it really wasn't. When back then, worship, the main way of worshiping something was to sacrifice to it, like the pinch of incense. Worship was not praying to Diocletian or Constantine or Nero, or that wasn't. You didn't pray to them. That wasn't the way you worshiped them. You didn't praise them. What the way of worship was considered back then was you offered a sacrifice of some type, and so
you're like swearing fealty to them.
Right. It was a covenantal. Actually, the worship was a the sacrifice was a covenantal way of having fealty towards them. It was swearing an allegiance, a lifelong allegiance to that person. It wasn't like just asking them for something. It was a big deal. It was covenantal. Of course, Constantine's Edict of Toleration did not force anybody to worship. As a matter of fact, eventually Constantine got a little bit more into the Christian faith later, and he did at one point tell his soldiers they had to pray to the King of Heaven on Sunday. But he didn't distinguish who the King of Heaven was, because he allowed the pagans to pray to Jupiter, and he allowed the Christians to pray to Christ or God. And so people have really got to understand, Constantine didn't start a Sunday law for worship. In fact, all he did was allow Christians to have a day off so they could go to church and go and pray and worship their God. But this was very, very unique. It was actually the opposite of what a lot of Christians believe. Yep. He actually was the very first person to have complete religious freedom be the standing rule throughout his empire. So anyway, that is just going through those edicts. Now, there's lots of different edicts, but a lot of people do not believe that that Constantine really was devoted. It was just for the purposes of, had
like legal purposes.
Yeah, just
for his own gain.
Yes, for his own gain. But I do want to give you one of Constantine's quotes that shows that at least the quote could presume that he's sincere about this.
Right.
We don't ever really know. But it does say, this is Constantine's quote, "Let no one interfere with his neighbor. Let each man do what his soul's desire." This is about the edicts that he wrote. And he said, "I am most convinced, firmly convinced, that I owe to the Most High God my whole soul, my every breath, my most secret and inmost thoughts." Then he continues, "Therefore I have dedicated my soul to thee in pure blend of love and fear, for I truly adore thy name, while I reverence thy power, which thou hast manifested by many proofs, and have made my faith even sure." So, in a sense, though his devotion to Christ was so much greater, he did these edicts so everyone would have the opportunity to practice the religion of their choice.
So basically, it started, he made it so you could have complete religious freedom.
Correct.
Throughout everywhere. He opened the door for Christians to be able to worship for once.
Yeah, for the first time.
Uninhibited, without being attacked.
Yeah. But this was only a few years afterwards. I think it was less than a decade. So you have this interesting chronology. For 300 years, Christianity was illegal and was persecuted and was hated. If it wasn't illegal, it was hated. And so then you have Constantine, who had been one of those that had persecuted the Christians, as a soldier. And then...
what's strange is when we were reading about this, I thought, you know what? He was St. Paul. He was just like St. Paul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
St. Paul's persecuting and killing Christians, and here's Constantine doing the same thing.
Yeah.
It's an interesting correlation, I think.
Right. And so here you've got Constantine calling the Council of Nicaea in 325. So it's been less than a decade since this Christian toleration has been proclaimed, and you had 300 years before that of worshiping in catacombs and getting together where people don't know who you are, and all these secret symbols of the fish and stuff like that. So there was a ragtag group of, everybody thinks that the Council of Nicaea was 300 men just sitting in, we're so
they show up in gold carriages, very smart, perfect white linen.
Yeah. that
very.
these people had some affluence in their lives, and they weren't. The bishops of this time had been through these persecutions. And let me tell you, there were many bishops that came that had been persecuted. There's one story of one of the bishops that had to be brought by his legs. He had lost his legs, the use of his legs, not lost his legs, but lost the use of his legs.
He'd been
during
so
persecution.
tortured.
That's right, tortured, that they had to carry him.
Right.
And there were people there that had lost their sight because of torture, or limbs.
I'd be scared if I was them.
Yes, and so a lot of these people had been through so much that they were actually afraid to show up, because they didn't know if Constantine wasn't setting them up and saying, "Oh yeah, I'm for religious church. Let's get all the Christian bishops in one area and then just kill them all." So I mean, they could. This is a good, and so there was a lot of hesitation.
I can imagine.
And so Bishop Eusebius was one of the few that knew Constantine and said, "No, this is legitimate, and we don't have to be afraid." But anyway, so this was in Turkey. So this Council of Nicaea did not happen in Rome. It happened on the eastern part of the, at least the Western world. And it did not take place in Rome. That's another thing that's really important, because I know a lot of Seventh-day Adventists believe that this was a problem that stemmed from Rome. And no, it was really in Turkey. So you've got all these bishops showing up. And the reason it was called is because Arianism, which is the belief that Christ was a created being, or he was somehow lesser than God. And actually,
these people couldn't accept the fact that there was flesh involved.
Right.
Christ was flesh, and wait a second, he was crucified on a cross. Oh, well, then there's no way he can be God.
Right. Yeah. So this Arian heresy was brought up, and Constantine had lots of close friends who were Arian, and there's legend that he was Arian. His mother, Helene, was a true Christian, and so he was sick of it. He was tired of, look, I'm a leader, I'm not a theologian, I don't want to. So he called this together and said, y'all get this worked out. And so he even though everybody says, well, he was kind of in charge, like he pushed it. I don't think he was not in charge of the theology. He got everybody there, and he opened it up.
Yeah, what was it about?
Ceremonies.
What was the Nicaea? What was the whole entire council about?
Yeah, it was about the Arian controversy.
The Arian controversy.
Right. And so they basically, that was what they were talking about. But they did bring up some other things. Now that it was free, and now they could worship freely, they had. All of the different areas had now different traditions that were starting up, and they realized now, oh my word, we're not in unity over this. And one of the things was the resurrection took place on Sunday, but it was coinciding with the Jews' Passover. That's when Christ went and he was crucified and risen. Well, the early Christians, some areas had continued to keep this in conjunction with the Jews. And some of them said, well, wait a minute. The Jews are setting our calendar. Don't you think as Christians now we need to be setting our calendar? So this is one of the things that they talked about in the Nicene Council, is when should we have Easter? Now, even though they did not fully come to an agreement about this was a huge controversy. There was many debates. You can even read this in primary sources, that they wanted very specifically to keep the correct holy day, because remember, the Jews didn't just have one holy day on Sabbath. They had many days that were holy, and Passover was one of the really big holy Sabbath. It was considered a Sabbath. And so they said, we want to keep the holy days on the correct day. Now, is it that we should keep it on the day that the Jews keep it, or should we keep it on Sunday, because it changes every single year? if these holy days were so important to Christians, it tells us, I think that if the seventh-day Sabbath had been an issue, if Constantine changed the Sabbath to Sunday, there would have been a massive uproar, because there was a massive uproar about what day to celebrate Easter and the resurrection on.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know there was zero, and I mean, I can't find one place in history, nor can anyone I've asked, this a historian, for the sources for this, where they realized there was even one debate over Sabbath, the change of the Sabbath at this time. And you would think that there would be, they had a massive paper trail for all of it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people ask why Pope Sylvester, who was the Pope at that time, and Constantine was such a huge figure that he overshadowed the Pope.
Absolutely.
But it wasn't that the Pope didn't agree with a Nicene Creed. He actually sent 2 representatives there, and so he was there and he was represented. But Pope Sylvester at this time was very old, and his health wouldn't allow him to go from Rome to Turkey. And so I want to give one little more note that I left out over here, is that about dates and the Sabbath and stuff. At the time of Constantine's rule, they had a vast empire, and many of them kept separate calendars. There was a group of people that kept an 8-day week, and then there was more in the Rome area.
And this is all in the same time, in the same city at the same time?
Well, not the same city,
country,
but
anyway.
Same empire.
Wow.
And they all kept the Julian calendar, which was established in 45 BC.
Mm-hmm.
But you had the Jews who were keeping their own calendars. Then there was, the people with the 8-day week calendar. And then there was another one that was a 7-day week. And so Constantine said, enough. We need to get on the same cycle here.
Right.
So what he did was he created this 7-day week that was had nothing to do with any solar or lunar schedule. So he just said, we're going to have a continually rotating 7-day week. Everybody get with the program. So anyway, then in 330, he moved the entire capital from Rome to Constantinople.
He took a very long-sighted view, and he started Christianization of his empire, of the whole entire Roman Empire, which is fascinating to me. Why would he do that? He has total control. If he hated Christians, why would he do that? Remember, he was persecuting and killing Christians before with Diocletian. Why he has the chance now to just wipe them out, utterly wipe them out? Why did he do it? He could have done it overnight.
Yeah.
He could have put a bounty on Christians' head. You know, you could just kind of utter, but he didn't.
Right.
Let's just take a look at a few things that he did that I was just blown away by. One, he gave extensive grants of land and money and property to the church. Why would you do that if you hated Christians so bad?
Yeah.
He strongly encouraged his subjects to follow Christ and to be Christians. He didn't force them to be Christians, but he strongly said, hey, just like he told his soldiers, every day you pray to the God of heaven, which is just absolutely fantastic.
Well, I don't know if it was every day, but I think it was for sure on Sunday.
So was it on Sunday?
Yeah, I think so, but I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look.
Next, he sent his mother, his own mother, who is a Christian. He sent her to the Holy Land. Well, why would he send his mother to the Holy Land? He wasn't exiling her. He gave her money and the power to go in, and she was saving like the birthplace of Christ.
Yeah, the Christian holy sites.
All the holy sites. She built churches and
cathedrals.
Cathedrals. Why would you do that if you were if you hated
or even if you, let's just say you're just trying to keep the Christians happy. This is over and beyond what was necessary. All you had to do was just allow them not to be persecuted anymore.
Oh, but just wait.
Okay.
This is so exciting. orphanages. There weren't anything as orphanages.
Yeah.
He invented orphanages. So he invented orphanages for children to come in, and then he protected them.
It just dawned on me, that's right, because there's not a constituency in babies that are being... Because remember back then, abortion was rampant, and babies that were born, that were something was wrong with them, or the parents didn't want them, they would just set them outside, what was called exposing children. And so it's not like it's a constituency that he would have to impress.
Right. Yeah.
They were going to die.
It's costing him money, time, and effort. Mm-hmm. Why would an emperor do that? Okay, right. Orphanages. He protected protection for women that they couldn't be raped. He protected the streets. And I couldn't figure out what that meant at first. Well, you're on the streets, and you're just picture this. You're going down the street, and you come by a pagan temple, and there's absolute atrocities happening in front of the temple, in the open, in front of everybody. Children, everybody walking by would see this. So he made them build walls to screen them off.
To screen to temple prostitutes, because they were allowed to come out and try to seduce people. Both male and female prostitution. So, it was pretty bad. Yeah. He
built huge churches and cathedrals. Why would you do that if you hated Christians?
Not just in Jerusalem, all over his kingdom.
Yeah. Why would you? It's one thing to protect them, and say, hey, you can't kill them. That's not nice. He didn't just say that's not nice. He said, not only are we going to protect Christians, we're going to build churches, we're going to build cathedrals. Mm-hmm. I strongly urge you to be Christian because it is better.
Yeah.
Anyway, he outlawed magic and divination. Why would he do that? He grew up pagan.
Yeah.
He didn't care about any of that. He didn't believe in any of that. It meant nothing. So why would he have a law against it? What's the purpose of that?
Divination and magic was a big part of their...
He abolished bloody spectacle sports like gladiators. Mm-hmm. Why would he do that? I'm sure that was a big draw, especially politically. Yeah, politically and money.
It would be equivalent to saying no more NFL. No, outlawing football or outlawing sports in general.
That's right.
That would not go over well. But he stood firm for that. So that's the reason we don't have gladiator sports now. Is because he outlawed it.
Another thing he did, he banned execution by cross. Mm-hmm. He banned crucifixions. Mm-hmm. That is absolutely amazing. So he also sponsored and commissioned Bishop Eusebius. This is so cool, to make 50 Bibles. Why would he do that? Mm-hmm. That was unbelievably expensive,
right?
To make, because each page, as everybody probably knows, was made out of vellum, a very, very processed, perfect sheet of leather.
Years and years just to make one Bible. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so there were 50 of them made. And what's really exciting is there's 3 of them left in the world. You can see them in a British library. The Septuagint, it's dated the mid-4th century, and it's called the Sinaiticus.
Okay? The Codex Sinaiticus.
Codex Sinaiticus. There is one almost complete that's called the Vaticanus Septuagint. 4th century as well. Well, it's the same group of 50.
Right, but they've been dated. In other words, the people have actually dated them, the scientists.
Yeah, right.
So,
and then Alexandrinus is in a British library. It's the Greek Septuagint.
Same one, all of them are Greek.
Yeah, and what's so exciting is there's out of this one here, it's almost absolutely perfect. There's 10 leaves or 10 pages missing out of it. Outside of it, it's perfectly intact, and they're huge, and it's so cool to see them. It's just phenomenal to know. Really, these are the first Bibles.
Complete. Or almost complete Bibles.
Almost complete Bibles.
There's little parchment papers and stuff that are around, but this shows us what they both, and which is interesting because this was actually 50 years before the canon was accepted in the Council of Carthage and Hippo and stuff. So this we know that this was the accepted Bible at that time because all three of them have close to identical books from the Bible.
So really interesting question
Mm-hmm.
I pose to you. What was the church's response to this? What are they thinking about all this stuff that Constantine is doing? What's going on?
Well, first of all, the church and all the early church did not conflate the Sabbath and Sunday. They didn't see what Constantine, they would have never recognized as these edicts and what Constantine was doing as changing the Sabbath to Sunday. They would have never seen it because they went to church every day, and this had nothing to do with making people worship or not worship. This wasn't necessarily a religious dictum. It was more of a legal, but they saw Sunday as the day of resurrection, and the meaning of Sunday was vastly different than the meaning of Sabbath to the early church. The early church's theological view of the Sabbath was they did not see Sunday as a Sabbath. They could not, because in their mind, the great fulfillment of the Sabbath was the 8th day, which was the day that Christ was crucified. It was the 8th. It was like a continuum, even though it was the first day of the next week. They had been waiting. There was even prophecies in the Old Testament that described the 8th day as the new beginning. The new earth and the new heaven started on the 8th day. So that's what they thought. So they didn't. Now, as far as Constantine himself, I think that if you go to Amazon.com and you look up in the book section at books written about Constantine, I mean, it's just tons of written about this man. And depending on who you are, because the Orthodox Church, the Eastern Orthodox, they believe he was a saint. Mm-hmm. They have a saint's day for him. And then the Catholic Church believes he was a good guy. They don't consider him a saint. But he was a very wonderful guy. And then we've got the whole spectrum down to Pentecostals and fundamentalists, and then Adventists place him as a bad guy because they believe that he changed the Sabbath. And even today's scholars, even though they may not take a theological view of him, they'll say that Constantine, because Eusebius he was the bishop, mm-hmm. and he wrote a biography on Constantine, and he just loved him. They were good friends. And scholars today said, "Oh, he's too close." I mean, he was, he's obviously loved him to death, and you can't get a good objective view from somebody like that. But
and I will say this: this is my opinion on it. Is Eusebius was a professional. He was a professional historian. He wasn't just. He may have been a good friend of his. Fine, that's fine. But he also has to be taken seriously. He's a bishop.
So Constantine. We need to be very careful that before we decide that he was evil or bad or whatever, or a saint, the Orthodox consider him the 13th apostle. So before we look at him with too harsh of a lens or too good of a lens, because he did murder people. How did God look at this emperor? What was, in the context of, we have 2,000 years of Christian culture that has changed our minds, how we think of things. Mm-hmm. But it was a very materialistic way of looking at your you know what I'm saying? It was like if God helped you with a battle, he was a good guy. If he, you know what I mean? And so if he helped you make sure you didn't die of starvation because there was a famine, or robbers were on every highway, it was very much in what God did for you.
There are politicians now you can kind of look at as possibly kind of equal to them, mm-hmm. in the sense that look at the outcome. Don't look at if they make you feel good. Don't if they've ever done anything bad in their life. What are they doing now? What's the direction of their life now? And are they benevolent? Are they good now? Are they making up for it? Because we're all sinners. Mm-hmm. So where do you go with that? I mean, is he a devil or is he a saint?
Yeah. Well, I mean, whether you like Trump or not.
Yeah.
You can think of Constantine being that Trump-like character, just this big,
absolutely.
huge character. This is really, really an important point, is that there was a Jewish rabbi called Hillel, and he to this day he's considered one of the great rabbis. Because Constantine tried to unify the empire and made it a 7-day cycle.
Right.
Hillel was kind of the end of this grouping of Jews that were saying, the way we knew the Sabbath before is that the Sanhedrin announced the Sabbath every week.
Yeah, remember the shofar horn?
Yeah, we've done a video on this.
And all of that, they blow that, and only they could do that.
Yeah, and so that was how they knew the Sabbath began. So that was always looking to the temple and the authorities of the temple that would tell you when holy days would happen. And so Hillel finally said, you know what? We're all scattered everywhere. The Jews there is no more temple. We've been, 200 plus years without a temple. Mm-hmm. And people have just looked up at the lunar calendar, tried to figure it out all themselves, because there was lots of calculations about when the Jewish holy days were. And he said, I think it's time we've got to not go against the emperor, and we're just all going to fit in the Sabbath as every 7 days. So it was Hillel that no longer connected the holy days of the Jews by the lunar and solar calendar. He was the one that said, we're just going to bring it down and the Lord will understand. He said it's too complex. Mm-hmm. And so that is what the most of the Jewish scholars today teach, is that Hillel no longer used he made it more for mathematical calculations as opposed to actually looking at the sun, moon, and stars for the holy days of the Jews.
Right.
So, and I think next time we're going to be doing some more on the story of the Sabbath, doing more about what the Catholics did after Constantine and the different Council of Laodicea and all that kind of stuff.
Right. So that's Constantine. I suggest you read about it. It's absolutely fascinating. It's not something that people read about anymore. No. So we suggest you read about it, and stay tuned for our next story of the Sabbath.
Bye, and God bless.
God bless you.
Look, you have a birdie. What color is he?